I know it's not really hiking season. I know I've got exams I should be studying for. But there's been this urge, this slow, constant hum to run away, and I've been resisting it for so long. So here I am again, standing at the start of another trail, just trying to keep my sanity in check. Three days before setting off, there was that terrible fire in Hong Kong. More than 100 people died. I did what I've trained myself to do over the years. I threw myself into work and convinced myself that I was fine. But in the quiet moments, on train rides and late night scrolls through the news, I was breaking down. It made me wonder what 5 days alone would really be like. No noise, no distractions, trapped in my own thoughts. Guess we'll find out. I stayed in Lancaster the night before, just so I could start early. Except the first train to Ulverston didn't run until after 10. What can you do? The trail eased me in gently. Flat farmland stretched ahead, divided by dry stone walls and interrupted by an endless series of gates, each one asking for a different solution. Metal, wood, string, stubborn hinges. The sun was out, which felt almost suspicious. I don't think I've ever seen the Lake District looking this forgiving. Nothing about this landscape felt dramatic yet. It was gentle, almost deliberately understated. Wide fields, low hills, dry stone walls repeating themselves mile after mile. The kind of scenery that doesn't demand your attention, but slowly earns it. And then, in the distance, just beyond the farmland and the familiar greens, I caught a glimpse of something different. Snow-dusted peaks, faint and almost unreal against the sky. Far away but enough to spark my curiosity, a quiet promise of what was still to come. People always say to go for a walk to clear your head when you're stressed, as if movement alone can untangle everything. But I often find myself spiraling even more in the silence, trapped with my own thoughts. It loops, replays, revisits conversations and decisions you wish you could undo. I don't often talk about my work as a doctor online, but when something shapes so much of your life, pretending it doesn't exist starts to feel dishonest, even to yourself. There was a stretch of phone calls I found especially hard. I made a mistake I shouldn't have. I was already disappointed in myself, and then a senior whose opinion I cared deeply about told me he was disappointed too. I went for long runs, had a few drinks, road trips with my friends, filled my days with movement and noise, anything to avoid sitting with feeling. What actually helped in the end was returning to work on Monday, doing my normal, and realizing that the world hadn't ended. That's how I usually cope, by throwing myself back into the chaos and not stopping long enough to feel the weight settle. As the afternoon slipped away, I found myself picking up the pace, not because the trail demanded it, but because the light was already thinning, and Beacon Town felt suddenly further away than it had on the map. The scenery hadn't changed much. Fields, walls, the same muted greens and browns, but time was becoming louder. Every glance at the sky carried a quiet calculation, How long until dusk? How long until I'd have to stop? By the time I reached Beacon Town, the light was already fading. I was completely alone. I wanted to see sunset over the lake, but the wind was howling, so I ended up inside my tent the whole night. Technically, you can't wild camp here in England. Most land is private, so what you do quietly for just one night. I set up my tent in the dark as discreetly as I could, trying to be part of the landscape without leaving a trace. I always have mental blocks when I wild camp. What if the wind snaps my tent poles? What if the ground floods? What if someone tells me to move on in the middle of the night? What if the pegs loose and I roll downhill in my sleep? The horrendous weather didn't help. Rain hammered down. Wind tugged at the fabric. I was snug and cozy in my sleeping bag. But at 3 in the morning, my brain didn't believe it. And the safest thing I could do was stay exactly where I was. It rained through the night. I didn't want to leave my tent at all. The morning should have been straightforward. The path between Beacon Town and Coniston is meant to be fairly gentle, but the weather had other ideas. River crossings came one after another, each one louder and more forceful than the last. Cold water rushing past my ankles, testing my footing. The weight on my back threw me off balance. I didn't trust my stance or myself, and every step felt like a little negotiation with gravity. My Gore-Tex shoes turned out to be completely useless at river crossings, where water just poured straight in. My rain jacket wasn't made for 8 hours of relentless downpour. The water ran down my legs, soaked my trousers, and made my rain pants feel equally pointless. Coniston water eventually appeared, massive and still, but the trail along its edge was flooded, turning what should have been an easy walk into a slow, careful negotiation of stepping stones and muddy patches. Every step took longer than I expected, my pace swallowed by the water and the chill that seeped through every layer of clothing. My friends would usually say I'm aggressively type A. Even when my trips look spontaneous, there's usually a spreadsheet involved somewhere. So yes, I'd booked a campsite for the night. But between work, exams, and whatever else I thought I was managing, I hadn't planned the daily mileages very well, and it slowly dawned on me that I'd almost certainly got the distances wrong. I I was shivering, teeth chattering and pressed for time, but I couldn't keep going without a warm brick, a cup of hot chocolate, a few moments of warmth and a chance to dry my gloves. For a brief moment, I forgot the wet and the wind, just letting warmth seep in before I plunged back into the soaked, unyielding trail. There was one day, a patient who had been with us for a while suddenly started bleeding badly. I remember sprinting through the hospital, trying to get everything in place, and then standing there, compressing, minute after minute, feeling completely helpless as warm blood kept pouring into my hands no matter what I did. It hit me harder than expected. Just days earlier, they'd been talking about plans after getting home. We spent that evening in theatres trying to stay calm, to stay focused, and a few days later, we realized there was nothing more we could offer. This year has taught me something I still struggle to accept. You can't fix everyone. Sometimes, for some patients, you're already at the end of the line, and knowing when not to operate, when to stop, is as much a skill as knowing when to act. And now here I am, out in the rain, the light draining fast from the sky. Even without snow, there's no disguising the fact that it's winter. I'm shivering, every layer soaked through, water dripping from my sleeves. I can't feel my toes anymore. There's no point being stubborn. I'm not doing river crossings in the dark. The touch screen on my phone had become completely useless in the rain, responding more to the row of raindrops than to my fingers. It was running out of batteries, but it wouldn't charge. The port was soaked through. I had a vague idea of where I was, but there was no signal anyways, so it hardly mattered. I waddled into the nearest hotel, dripping like a duck, shamelessly asking if they had any numbers for local taxis. They didn't seem remotely surprised. I suppose it's a fairly common sight around here. So yeah, sorry I skipped about 5 miles, but that's not really the point. By the time I reached the campsite, it was completely dark, the field already flooded, not a single tent in sight. I sat in the drying room for nearly an hour, trying to pull myself back together. A hairdryer became my last hope, aimed at my phone's charging port. At that point, my sleeping system was the only thing that was still dry, and I was determined to keep it that way. It really isn't a technical trail, but it was one of those character-building days. A bit chaotic, but we got there, and in a strange way, it felt like a fair reflection of where my life is right now. Even the road to the pub was flooded, still water rising to mid-calf. Sitting inside, wrapped in warmth, listening to the low hum of conversation, it felt like, for a moment, none of it really mattered. The rain finally eased, not gone, just softened, and suddenly the world looked completely different. Mist lingered in the valleys and droplets hang in the air like tiny diamonds. Every rivulet, every branch, every pooled hollow caught the light in a way it hadn't before. The rivers were still swollen, but now they sang. Water spilled over rocks and tumbled through cascades, waterfalls roaring into hidden pools. It felt alive, the kind of aliveness that pulls you out of your own head, if only for a moment. The path climbs steeply through the valley, the branching rivers stretching upwards like stag horns against the slopes. I stopped often, more than I should have, just to watch, to take in the absurdity and the beauty of it all. England didn't feel like England that day. I could have been anywhere. Nepal, New Zealand, somewhere wild and untouched. The same rain that makes path harder is what brings the waterfalls to life and leaves a rainbow in its wake. Strangely, I didn't feel tired at all this trip. My muscles weren't aching, my lungs barely noticed the climb. The backpack that had pressed into my shoulders before it felt lighter now. Every step was a quiet reminder that I was capable, strong, steady, stubborn in the best possible way. I reached the top of Stake Pass almost without realizing it. Alone, grinning into the wind. I love mountain days like this. This is what endurance teaches you. You trade mental weight for physical weight. You carry a pack on your back and let your thoughts fall into rhythm with your stride. The burden doesn't disappear, it just shifts and somehow becomes easier to carry. Maybe I'm doing this for the wrong reasons. Maybe I'm just swapping one form of escape for another. I can't physically exhaust myself forever, but for now, it feels like a privilege to be tired, to have the chance to learn and grow at work, to have a body strong enough to take me through places like this. By the time I reached Borrowdale, the drizzle had crept back in. As if on autopilot, I dropped my gear in the drying room and wrapped my hands around the hot coffee, sinking into the warmth by the hostel fireplace. For the first time in days, the weight in my chest loosened, just a little. The world still felt sharp and bright, but somehow gentler too. I didn't want a repeat of day 2, so I started early, quietly sleeping up before breakfast, trading warmth and routine for a head start and a bit of control. The air was cold and still, the kind that sharpens your focus before you've fully woken up. The path along Durrant Water was familiar. I'd walked it before, not too long ago, doing cat baths with my friends, chatting, stopping for photos, never really thinking about where my feet landed. But this time it barely resembled itself. The trail had turned into a shallow stream, water creeping over stones and swallowing edges of the path. What I remembered as gentle and forgiving was now something you had to negotiate, step by careful step. My feet never really dried, and I stopped pretending they would. Keswick is the kind of town where you can find all my favourite brands, the sort of place that usually invites you to linger. I didn't browse, but I did stop for a quick lunch. People around were sipping lattes, chatting quietly, completely at ease in the dry warmth. I felt like a walking storm, a brief pause, a gulp of hot chocolate, and then back out into the mist, back to the trail. After Keswick, I was on a mission, half running, half walking, pushing into the fog and leaving the town behind me. The further I went, the wilder it felt. Proper wilderness, remote, quiet in a way that sharpens your senses. There wasn't a soul around, and the fog swallowed everything ahead, shrinking the road down to a few vague shapes and shifting shadows. Trying to cover more than 30 kilometers in barely 8 hours of daylight takes stubborn determination, but it also leaves very little margin for error. Skiddaw House drifted past like a ghost town, empty, silent. Medicine has taught me all the ways a place like this can hurt you. The parasites living in the river, the diseases takes carry in the grass, the fractures that come from a single misstep near a cliff. I know objectively that I would probably survive longer if I didn't choose adventures like this. But medicine has also taught me something else. How to sit with discomfort, how to recognize the voice in my head that wants to quit and not let it take over, how to stay locked in, to keep moving, to not panic when things start to go wrong. As the light faded, my focus narrowed. The path thinned beside the waterfall, slick rock underfoot, water rushing louder than my thoughts. The fog thickened until distance and direction lost their meaning. And I kept stopping, scanning the hillside, second-guessing the map, wondering if I'd already walked past the bothy without knowing it. I knew Great Lingy Bothy was here somewhere, but in this weather it felt deliberately hidden, swallowed by the landscape. With daylight draining fast and cold creeping in, the fear of missing it entirely settled heavily in my chest. And then, at the very last moment, it appeared. I didn't really see it until I was almost in front of it. It took me nearly 2 hours to warm up. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the walls. I let my sleeping bag cocoon me, disoriented in the darkness, drifting in and out of sleep. There was nothing to do in the long 16-hour winter night but lie still and wait for the morning, working through the 100 multiple-choice questions on my phone, or maybe just hallucinating, when 2 other hikers arrived sometime in the dark. The alarm went off in complete darkness, the wind still howling outside, rattling the walls, my clothes still damp from the night before. I swore quietly to myself, aware, vaguely, that I probably needed better gear, but there was no time to dwell. Morning waits for no one out here. It didn't take long to reach High Pike, my 5th rain ride and the highest point of the entire trail. Of course it was windy, it always is, but this time the fog began to lift, just enough to reveal that unmistakable Lake District green, rolling, soft, almost gentle in contrast to the conditions. A brief reward, a reminder of why people fall in love with this place. By the time I dropped into Carlback, I was dripping again, rain-soaked, slightly virile, but deeply grateful for a warm breakfast and a roof overhead. I finally had phone signal here. Messages from work poured in. I laughed to myself, realizing how detached I've been, how small and distant the world felt just then. The final stretch towards Khalil returned me to flat farmland, much like day one. Open, functional, unremarkable, no drama, no views demanding attention, just steady forward movement, step after step. And somewhere along those quiet miles, the parallels became obvious. At the end of the day, you can't control much. You can't change the weather. You can't fix a broken system on your own, so you adapt. If the rain doesn't stop, you find better clothing, or you accept cold wet fits for days. If opportunities were scarce, you work harder, sharpen yourself, make yourself harder to ignore. There are days at work when I feel it creeping in, the irritability, the restlessness, the way frustration spills onto people who don't deserve it, the familiar urge to run away from everything. I talk about work-life balance a lot. I look calm, I act chill, and yet lately, I've been staying late more than I need to, volunteering for overtime, caring more than I'd like to admit. I know these are rites of passage. Every surgeon was once slow, with a full theatre watching them suture. Every doctor has known exhaustion, loss, the quiet replay of decisions long after a shift ends. So I tell myself not to be weak, not to be dramatic. I put on a smile and I survive. Don't get me wrong, I love my job. I wouldn't have stayed otherwise. But this is the weight we carry. This trip challenged me far more mentally than it ever did physically, and maybe that's exactly why I seek things like this. The chance to test myself, to sit with discomfort, to prove I'm not fragile. Because weight doesn't just slow you down, carried long enough, it makes you stronger. I reached Khalil just as darkness settled in. Christmas lights glowed in shop windows. People walked past in clean coats, dry shoes, hands wrapped around takeaway cups. I felt half relieved to finally escape the rain, and half sad that it was over. I feel like I'm ending all my trips this year by going straight back to night shifts, but maybe this time I'll be alright.